Samuel was a man with an impeccable track record of listening to God. He had anointed Saul, judged Israel with fairness, and was respected as a prophet and spiritual leader. However, at this point in the story, things were complicated. Saul had seriously messed up by disobeying God, and God decided, "Enough, I'm going to choose another king." Now imagine this. God gives Samuel a clear command. He was to go to Jesse's house in Bethlehem to anoint the next king. But Samuel, who was usually so confident, felt the weight of anxiety. Saul was unpredictable and violent, and Samuel knew that any suspicious move could cost him his life. Even so, God assured him, "Go, I am with you." But anxiety isn't that simple, is it? Samuel began to question, what if Saul finds out? What if I die before I even anoint this new king? Will I be able to do this without being noticed? We already know that God never fails, but at that moment, Samuel was trapped in what we all face at some point, the fear of the worst-case scenario. The stage was set, and anxiety was in control. The story takes place during a time when the leadership of Israel was in crisis. Saul, the first king, had started well, but pride and disobedience had distanced him from God. The people were divided between respecting Saul as the king and questioning his actions. In this tense scenario, Samuel was seen as the bridge between God and Israel, a man whose word carried divine authority. But Samuel was also human. He felt the weight of responsibility and knew that his actions could put the entire nation in danger. His dilemma was real: obey God or protect his own life. This conflict showed that, as spiritual as Samuel was, he also struggled with very human fears. On the other hand, Saul was unpredictable. After being rejected by God, he became increasingly paranoid and violent, especially towards anyone who threatened his position as king. The mere idea of Samuel anointing another king was enough reason for him to act with brutal force. Meanwhile, in Bethlehem, there were Jesse and his sons, including the young David. He was the youngest, a shepherd who lived on the fringes of major political decisions. David had no idea that his life was about to change, and his simplicity contrasted with the tense atmosphere surrounding Samuel and Saul. This world was a mix of hope and fear, where the future of the nation depended on an act of courage from Samuel. However, in our reimagined version, the weight of anxiety begins to shape Samuel's decisions, showing how even the greatest leaders can hesitate when fear speaks louder. The conflict begins to take shape when Samuel decides to postpone his trip to Bethlehem. He spends days trying to justify his hesitation. Does God really need me to do this now? Maybe there's another way. This postponement begins to create both internal and external tensions. While Samuel struggles with his own thoughts, news of his hesitation reaches the ears of some leaders of Israel. Why is the prophet so quiet? Is he plotting something against King Saul? This kind of murmuring does not go unnoticed by the king, who becomes even more suspicious and paranoid. Samuel tries to find an alternative. He prays, asks for signs, and even thinks about sending another messenger in his place. But nothing seems to alleviate his anxiety. With each passing day, the fear of being discovered by Saul increases, and the task that God gave him seems more impossible. At the same time, in Bethlehem, Jesse and his family continue their simple life, unaware that they are at the center of God's plan. But David begins to have strange dreams and a restlessness in his heart. He doesn't know what's happening, but he feels that something big is about to change. Meanwhile, Saul sends spies to monitor Samuel. The king senses that something is in the air, but he can't figure out what. The political climate becomes even heavier, and Samuel realizes that he is running out of options. His hesitation is about to cause an impact he cannot control, and the clock is ticking. Samuel's anxiety prevents him from fulfilling his mission, and each passing day increases the risk for him and the nation. The tension is at its limit, and the consequences of his delay begin to unfold. While Samuel struggles with his anxiety, other stories begin to unfold in parallel, deepening the complexities of the story. Saul, increasingly paranoid, begins to question even his most loyal advisors. He demands to know where Samuel is and if anyone is conspiring against him. The king's uncertainty generates distrust in his government, leaving the people even more divided. David begins to feel that his life as a shepherd is no longer enough. He finds himself looking at the horizon, as if something is calling him out of his routine. In a moment of reflection, David asks God, "Is there something more that you expect of me?" This subplot highlights the contrast between the call that is coming and Samuel's hesitation to fulfill it. Samuel not only faces the fear of Saul, but also the spiritual weight of not obeying God promptly. He begins to have disturbing visions during the night, where chaos reigns in Israel because he did not act in time. His anxiety is not only political, but also deeply spiritual, amplifying his internal conflict. The leaders of the tribes begin to argue among themselves. Some believe that Samuel is planning something big, while others fear that he has given up on his mission. This murmur generates divisions that threaten to further weaken the nation. These subplots add layers to the narrative, showing how Samuel's hesitation affects not only him, but also David, Saul, and all of Israel. Each day of delay is not just a matter of personal anxiety, but a delay in fulfilling the divine plan. On a night of deep unrest, Samuel tries to pray in his house, but his mind is full of doubts. He begins to have an intense and disturbing dream. In the dream, Israel is at war, and Saul is defeated, leading the nation to chaos. Samuel sees villages burned, families destroyed, and the presence of God seeming distant. When he wakes up, sweating, something is clear. His hesitation can have devastating consequences. He feels that he needs to act, but the fear of Saul still paralyzes him. Even so, he decides to try. The next morning, Samuel begins to plan his trip to Bethlehem. But before he leaves, a twist occurs. A messenger from Saul arrives at his door. "The king wants to know your intentions, prophet. There are rumors that you are planning to anoint a new king." Samuel is seized by panic. He tries to deny it, but the messenger, suspicious, leaves to report to Saul. The atmosphere becomes even more tense. Samuel realizes that he is now being watched and that Saul can act at any moment. This pressure causes him to postpone his trip again, even though he knows that God has called him to go. Meanwhile, in Bethlehem, David feels an inexplicable sense of urgency. He has an encounter with God in the field, where he realizes that something is about to change, but he doesn't understand what. He feels a mixture of excitement and fear, as if he is being prepared for something bigger. Samuel is in an even more complicated position. He is now divided between his obedience to God and his fear of Saul, while the fate of Israel and David remains in suspense. Samuel's hesitation begins to trigger a series of unexpected consequences. With rumors that Samuel might be plotting something, Saul mobilizes his personal guard to monitor the prophet's movements. He decrees that any suspicious action must be reported immediately. This increased surveillance causes fear not only in Samuel, but also in the elders of Israel, who now avoid any mention of changes in the kingdom. Feeling increasingly cornered, Samuel isolates himself, avoiding public appearances. He tries to convince himself that he is waiting for the right moment, but deep down, he knows that he is postponing his mission out of fear. He is consumed by anxiety, seeing a spy of Saul in every shadow. Meanwhile, in Bethlehem, David continues to live his simple life as a shepherd. He has moments of deep restlessness and prayer, but without clear direction. His brothers begin to mock his seriousness. "What are you always thinking about, David? You're just a shepherd. Accept that." These words increase the doubt in David's heart, who wonders if he is just imagining a greater purpose for his life. Samuel's hesitation creates a vacuum of spiritual leadership. Saul, increasingly unstable, makes rash decisions that put Israel at risk. Conflicts with the Philistines intensify, and without a divinely guided leader to inspire the people, the nation's morale begins to plummet. Samuel realizes that God's silence is becoming increasingly evident. He no longer feels the same clarity in prayers, as if his hesitation had blocked the direct communion he had always had. This feeling devastates him, but he still does not find the courage to act. These reactions show how Samuel's anxiety not only affects his own life, but also puts an entire nation at risk. The consequences of his hesitation begin to spread like a domino effect. Despite being immersed in anxiety and fear, Samuel begins to realize that his hesitation is harming not only him, but the entire nation. An unexpected conversation with a faithful elder of Israel changes everything. The man visiting Samuel shares a word of encouragement. "Samuel, you have always taught us that obeying God is better than any sacrifice. Why then is the prophet of the Lord hesitating? God has already given you everything you need. What are you waiting for?" These words echo in Samuel's heart, awakening him to the reality of his situation. He realizes that his anxiety has roots in his shaken confidence, both in himself and in God. But to overcome this, Samuel decides to do something simple but powerful. Go back to the basics. He fasts, prays, and asks for forgiveness for the delay. On a night of deep prayer, he finally feels God's presence again and clearly hears, "Did I not command you? Go, Samuel, because I have already prepared the way." The transformation begins to occur within Samuel. He realizes that, despite his fear, the only way to overcome his anxiety is to take the first step of obedience. Samuel also decides to prepare a strategy. He plans his trip to Bethlehem carefully, disguising his mission with the excuse of offering a sacrifice to the Lord. This practical approach helps him face his fears without neglecting obedience. This moment of overcoming does not completely resolve his anxiety, but Samuel grows by learning that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to obey even when fear is present. He realizes that trusting in God is the only way to move forward, even in the face of seemingly impossible challenges. With his courage restored, Samuel prepares for his most challenging mission. He decides to travel to Bethlehem discreetly, following God's plan, but with the caution of a man who understands the danger. Samuel arrives in Bethlehem under the pretext of performing a sacrifice to the Lord. He summons the elders of the city, who are apprehensive about his presence, fearing that it may attract the wrath of Saul. Samuel reassures them, "I have come to offer a sacrifice. Prepare yourselves and sanctify yourselves." This move not only disguises his true mission, but also generates a sense of reverence in the city. Samuel, finally face to face with Jesse, is introduced to his sons. He observes each one carefully. The oldest, Eliab, impresses with his appearance and posture. For a moment, Samuel thinks, "This must be the chosen one." But God intervenes, speaking to Samuel's heart. Do not look at his appearance or his height. The Lord sees the heart. One by one, Jesse's sons pass before Samuel, but God rejects them all. This begins to generate a new kind of tension. Samuel asks, "Are these all your sons?" Jesse replies, a little suspicious, "There is still the youngest, but he is taking care of the sheep." While David is called from the field, Samuel feels the weight of the moment. He knows that anxiety still hovers in his mind, but now he is focused on the mission. The wait is long, and the silence that surrounds the environment increases the tension. He is dirty from working in the field, with an innocent look, unaware that his life is about to change forever. When he enters, there is a moment of absolute silence. Samuel, who spent days struggling against his anxiety, feels something different. It's as if the presence of God fills the room. God speaks clearly to Samuel's heart. "This is the chosen one. Get up and anoint him, for he is the one." Now fully aligned with God's call, he does not hesitate. He takes the horn of oil and pours it over David's head. As the oil flows, the young man feels something extraordinary. The Spirit of the Lord comes upon him with power, marking the beginning of a new journey. The elders and Jesse's family watch in silence, astonished. David, confused, asks, "But why me? I'm just a shepherd." Samuel, with a look now full of confidence and peace, replies, "God chose you because he sees the heart, not the appearance." As Samuel finishes the anointing, there is a sense of fulfillment in the air. But at the same time, a new kind of tension arises. Everyone there knows that this decision will put David and Samuel at risk. Saul will not easily accept the idea of another king. This moment is not only a victory for Samuel, but also a milestone in the divine plan. His hesitation and anxiety were finally overcome, and he was able to fulfill the mission. However, the climax leaves a question in the air. What will be Saul's reaction when he finds out what happened? With the mission accomplished, Samuel leaves Bethlehem with a mixture of relief and restlessness. He knows that he has anointed the man chosen by God, but he also understands that the consequences of his action will soon be felt. The prophet returns to Ramah, where he withdraws to pray and seek God's direction for what comes next. David, in turn, returns to the field to tend the sheep, but something has changed. He now carries in his heart the certainty that God has a special plan for his life. Even without fully understanding what that means, David feels the weight and responsibility of having been chosen. He does not share the news with many people, but in his moments of solitude, he begins to compose psalms, reflecting on the divine call. News of Samuel's visit to Bethlehem reaches Saul. Although he does not yet know that David has been anointed, the king feels a growing sense of threat. His paranoia increases, and he begins to make impulsive decisions, trying to secure his control over the kingdom. This tension marks the beginning of a conflict that will change the destiny of Israel forever. Samuel, reflecting on his journey, understands that his anxiety almost compromised God's plans. He realizes that, despite his fears, God was patient and merciful, giving him the chance to correct his course. He prays in thanksgiving, but also asks for forgiveness for having doubted. The conclusion shows that even with the challenges overcome, the story is far from over. The act of anointing David is just the beginning of a new era for Israel, but also an era that will be marked by conflict, growth, and, above all, God's faithfulness. Years later, David would become the greatest king of Israel, known for his courage, faith, and heart devoted to God. However, at that moment in Bethlehem, he was still just a young shepherd, shaped by time and the simplicity of the countryside. Samuel, now advanced in age, observes from afar as God's plans begin to unfold. He lives long enough to see David emerge as a promising leader, even as Saul struggles to maintain his throne. The prophet, in his quietness, reflects on that mission he almost failed to fulfill. He understands that God does not depend on our perfection, but seeks hearts willing to obey. Meanwhile, David, now an experienced man, composes a psalm that summarizes the entire journey. "When I was anxious, you comforted me. When I was small, you chose me. Lord, you are my rock and fortress." The story of Samuel, Saul, and David reminds us that even in human failures, God's purposes never fail. This reimagined story of Samuel leads us to reflect on the impact of anxiety in our lives and how it can lead us away from God's plan. How many times do we know what we need to do, but hesitate because fear speaks louder? Maybe it's a fear of failure, of others' judgment, or even of losing something we consider essential. Samuel was a prophet of God, someone accustomed to hearing and obeying the Lord. But even he had his faith challenged. His anxiety almost prevented him from fulfilling his mission, jeopardizing the entire divine plan for Israel. And how many times do we also find ourselves in this position? Paralyzed, postponing important decisions, waiting for time to solve what actually requires our action. But God is patient. He doesn't give up on us, even when we are slow to trust. Samuel needed a push, a moment of confrontation with himself and with God, to finally act. This teaches us that courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to obey, even with trembling hands. Anxiety is a common reality these days, whether in studies, at work, in finances, or in personal relationships. Everyone has faced moments when the weight of the future seems overwhelming. Like Samuel, it's easy to fall into the trap of overthinking and underacting. But what we learn here is that God does not call us to be perfect, but to be faithful. Another powerful point of this story is the choice of David. When God chose him, he was not strong, rich, or influential. He was young, unknown, and his only experience was caring for sheep. Still, God saw something in his heart that no one else saw. This is a reminder that God does not evaluate us by appearances or external abilities, but by what is within us. Now, think about your own life. What is God asking you to do that you are postponing because of anxiety? It could be something small, like reconnecting with a friend, or something big, like changing careers or starting a ministry. The question is, are you listening to the call and trusting that God has already prepared the way. Samuel's hesitation almost compromised God's plan, but he still had the chance to correct course. We too can find the strength to overcome our doubts and move forward. God doesn't need us to be heroes. He just wants willing hearts. Finally, the story of Samuel, Saul, and David reminds us that our decisions affect not only our lives, but also those of others around us. When Samuel finally obeyed, he paved the way for David to become king, bringing new hope to Israel. And you? What impact can your choices have on the people around you? So, the next time anxiety tries to stop you from acting, remember Samuel and how he overcame his fear. Obedience may not be easy, but it is always rewarding. God is greater than any scenario or threat. He just needs you to take the first step. Now, I want to know from you, is there something God is asking you to do, but fear has been holding you back? Share in the comments. Let's talk about it and encourage each other. If this story touched you, how about sharing it with someone who also needs this message? Maybe you know someone who is facing anxiety or struggling to make an important decision. This video can be a reminder that God doesn't give up on us and is always by our side. And so, did you enjoy this What If? If so, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. We are always reimagining biblical stories to bring reflections that transform our walk with God. Activate the little bell so you don't miss the next videos. Thank you for watching, and remember, even when anxiety tries to stop us, God has already prepared the way. All we need to do is trust and take the first step. Until next time.